We have even more drones than they have soldiers. We need to prove this math so that there are even more dead in the field so that they stay there forever. The goal is clear. They'll die Russian everywhere, on all fronts. That's a quote today from Ukrainian soldier call sign Bakhmut Demon, and it kind of lines up with the footage we're seeing coming off the battlefield, especially in the south around Pokrovsk, where the number of Russian soldiers being targeted and killed day to day, week to week, is pretty staggering. And that's saying something that we're nearly 4 years into this war. Now, starting out with some updates around Kupiansk, turning over to Deep State map here. As a bit of a refresher, back on November 20th, so the map here shows red Russian-controlled territory, green Ukrainian-controlled territory, and the gray is the gray zone between, contested area. November 20th, President Putin put out a note saying that Russia had completely secured Kupyansk. His generals told him that that was the case. He then invited international media to come in and see for themselves. This was disproven yesterday. We'll do a quick map update to where this sits, where this blue territory changed hands and is now in control of Ukrainian armed forces. They cut off the Russians to the north, and the footage that we have coming out today seems to show Ukrainian forces moving into central Kupiansk, hunting down and eliminating the remaining Russian soldiers. Now, in terms of official updates, not a lot has changed. You can see the map update not changing between the 12th and the 13th. So this generally has been, I would say, agreed upon by both Ukrainian and Russian sources at this point. A lot of Russian military correspondents pretty angry right now. What they talk about is the term taking a city on credit, with the Russians saying a little too early they had taken Kupiansk and clearly had not yet been able to consolidate. In terms of an assessment here, looking to Institute for the Study of War, where they say the Ukrainian advances in and near Kupiansk show that Ukrainian forces are capable of conducting successful counterattacks and making tactically significant gains, particularly when Russian forces are overstretched. The seizure of Kupiansk has been a Russian priority since mid to late July 2025, but Russian forces have been unable to allocate sufficient force concentrations to overcome Ukrainian defenses in this area as they pursue intense offensive operations elsewhere in the theater. Putin and senior Russian military officials have been attempting to portray the front line in Ukraine as imminently on the verge of collapse, such that Ukraine and the West should concede to Russia's demands. But this Ukrainian counterattack in Kupiansk, along with staunch Ukrainian resistance along the rest of the line, shows that this narrative is false. And we have seen a handful of different claims come from Russia seeming to line up with the negotiation track. So there was a meeting between U.S. senior officials in the Kremlin. Right around that time, we heard that Kupiansk had fallen. Just before that, we got word that Pokrovsk had completely fallen. Now, we are going to get into some details around Pokrovsk. It is not a good situation for Ukraine, but it does seem like this was Russia trying to present that narrative. Ukraine, you may as well give up this territory. You're going to lose it anyways. In fact, today you lost another town. And the counterattack at Kupiansk, I agree with the ISW assessment here. The major takeaway is that Ukraine is still able to put together these tactical counterattacks. And there's some terminology here that's important. This is a counterattack, not a counteroffensive. It's relatively localized around Kupiansk, but the counter to that, no pun intended, is that's how Russia is operating right now as well. So we're not seeing broad attacks across the front, but rather localized in places like Kupiansk, down near Zaporizhia, and of course, Pokrovsk. Now, a quick update on the fundraiser we kicked off a couple days ago. We're killing it. This is insane. Working with Car for Ukraine to pick up 4 pickup trucks for 2 different Ukrainian units. We hit 20,000 euros overnight. So, spoiler alert, we are now number 1 on the leaderboard, and I think we're going to stay there because we're going to close this thing out soon. Now, the goal here had a couple different units reach out, talk about the need for pickup trucks or just vehicles of any kind at the front. We know about that, and the countless footage coming out. The vehicles are getting hit and destroyed left and right. So, working with 2 different units here. The first is the 26th Artillery Brigade. They put together, both these units actually put together new videos just saying thank you for your support as we try to get these in their hands. So we've got the 26th operating in Kupiansk and Pokrovsk, so pretty relevant to the territories we're talking today, and then a Special Forces unit within the National Guard of Ukraine operating in the east. Pretty vague on that one, but both of these units in pretty desperate need of vehicles. We're going to do what we can to try to get these in their hands. Of course, a couple different patches available for donors, and then 2,500 euros for you big, deep-pocketed donors. Get a custom logo or a name or whatever you want on the side of one of these vehicles. So again, this thing is off and running. Hopefully we can close this thing out before the holidays, and then we will get the footage, some pictures and videos showing the delivery to these units, hopefully before Christmas gets here. Now, turning back to the map, we are going to focus today mostly on Kupyansk and Pokrovsk, where it does look like Ukraine stopped another Russian attempt to try to push into that city. But it's not as though everything here is sunshine and roses, right? So there's been a lot of Russian advances in multiple areas, and turning now to two majors. So a Russian mill blogger here talking about how they're portraying advances in other areas of the front. And I'm using his assessment here because it's one that's regularly utilized as pretty reliable. And I think it does generally match up to the conditions on the ground. It's regularly repeated by Rybar and other pretty large Russian media outlets. And today, it's pretty lacking in detail, so very broad. And I thought it was worth presenting that. They start up north, where they say in the Sumy direction, way up here in the north. He says, in the Sumy direction, the northern group of forces continues active offensive actions in several frontline sectors. And a quick note here, actually, I just shared a picture yesterday. I shared it a year ago, but it's a friend of ours, Sergey. He's a commander, a Bradley commander in 47th Mechanized Brigade. He held up a Go Army Beat Navy flag, which is perfect because today, December 13th, is when Army actually beats Navy on the football field. And I shared that on social media, and we had some folks say, hey, how are the 47th doing right now? Because this is an old picture. And Sergey chimed in and he said, we're doing well. You know, we're staying in touch with those guys. He said, I'm about 3 kilometers from where this photo was taken. That photo was taken in Kursk over a year ago. So the big Russian push in the Sumy region has effectively moved at least that Bradley crew a solid 3 kilometers back into Ukrainian territory, to give you an idea of how little the front lines have changed in some of these areas. Continuing on with the map here, over in Kharkiv, Russia says that they're continuing their advance in 2 different areas. They call out Perlipka down here, butchered that for sure, and then a little bit to the northeast, Vovchansk Kutori. So 2 small villages, settlements maybe. Seversk actually is one that seems to have changed hands, with the Russians taking control of this just in the last 24 to 48 hours. Seversk here, deep state map, seems to still show the western portion of the city in the gray zone. More and more reports are coming out now that Russia has successfully taken all of Seversk. And then down in Zaporizhia, again, 2 majors talking pretty high level. Get over here. Almost there. Here we go. Down here in Zaporizhia, a couple different areas 2 majors is talking about, saying they're continuing their advances or attacks in the Novodolivka area here, just south of Orhiv, and then a little bit further east, but no talk, again, for some reason, about Huliopol, which has been a focus of Russian offensive operations for a while now in the Zaporizhia direction. Now, they did play some footage from Pokrovsk showing that the Russian Defense Ministry organized a press tour for Russian journalists to, quote, demonstrate our troops' control over the liberated city. And they no doubt did show that. We have that video right here to check out. But we also got some other footage coming out of Pokrovsk. I mean, it's no doubt that Russian forces are in a large portion of the city. But we got this one here from the Ukrainian 155th Separate Marine Brigade, where they said on December 10th in Pokrovsk, the occupants attempted to advance in a large column. It was destroyed within the hour following the start of its movement through the joint efforts of units from the Ukrainian Defense Forces, including the 155th Separate Marine Brigade. They say in this video, you see the work of our brigade's attack drone teams during the destruction of the column. During the column's advance, the road was first blocked, which can be seen in the very first seconds of the video. After that, the enemy column was completely destroyed on the spot in about 20 minutes. It is shocking that we continue to see Russian advances like this in large numbers. In fact, a quick note, kind of a personal anecdote, maybe, if that's the right way to frame this. I was interviewing a Ukrainian commander yesterday that's going to air here in the probably next 2 or 3 weeks. I'm excited to share with you all. And I was talking about the Russian soldiers approaching Ukrainian lines and said, are there certain areas you have to watch more than others? Thinking like concealed approaches, this and that, tree lines. And he said, yes and no. I mean, we know general areas they're going to come from, but the challenge is you have to watch everywhere, because you might not think that a Russian soldier would walk across an open field in broad daylight in range, clear range of Ukrainian drones, but they do. And every so often, there's just a lone Russian soldier wandering in broad daylight across a giant open field. So yeah, you kind of got to watch everywhere. And of course, we've seen the footage of that. It's not just these relatively larger assaults carried out on roads leading to Pokrovsk and elsewhere along the front, but the individual soldiers, 1, 2, 3 at a time, getting hit daily by Ukrainian drones. In fact, to give you an idea of the volume there, we're turning over to the Unmanned Systems Forces of Ukraine. Put in place a system a few months ago where they track every one of their strikes, and it has to be recorded on film. So this isn't a matter of, I flew the drone over there, it hit a truck, we're going to count the truck destroyed. Everything has to be verified with footage. So they have a website, a live tracker, and you can see the progress of these units. Now, this one is the Mygar Birds. I'm going to go back to the overall Unmanned Systems Forces grouping here, and I'll put this link in the description below if you want to check this out yourselves. But so far in December, they're tracking 2,840 Russian soldiers killed. It's in 13 days. All right? Not going to mess with the math too much there, but you're talking about more than 20 soldiers a day, or more than 200 Russian soldiers a day killed. It's insane. Now, if you go back to November, we're talking about these numbers going up. 4,800 in the entire month of November versus 2,800 already in the first 12, 13 days of December. And we're seeing this in the footage. We're seeing stacks of Russian bodies trying to move through choke points that the Ukrainian forces continue to target. So it shouldn't be a shock that these numbers are going up. The shocking part is that we see Russia continue to throw bodies in some of these directions. Again, going back to that statement that we started the video with from Bakhmut Demon. We have more drones. The Ukrainians have more drones than Russians have soldiers. So they're just going to continue to kill them one by one, making Russia pay for every square inch they move forward. Now, we also got some videos from the Pokrovsk direction from the Ukrainian GUR. I'll share this here, where they say the video shows episodes of an operation carried out in November 2025 in the Pokrovsk direction, storming a building where Russian invaders had entrenched themselves, clearing trenches, shooting down an enemy drone, the meticulous work of FPV operators providing medical assistance to the wounded. These are exclusive footage of the combat work of soldiers from the 6th Special Operations Unit as part of the Timur Special Unit of the GUR of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. They say as a result of the storming and clearing of certain frontline areas, the tactical position of the units of the security and defense forces, which are defending the Pokrovsk-Minigrad area, have been improved. Now, a note on that, because there's been, I would argue, some pretty positive moves by Ukraine here in just the last couple days. We shouldn't assume that everything is going swimmingly. If we move back to the map here to look at the Pokrovsk direction, especially around Minigrad, there is an interesting assessment that I wanted to share from Pravda. Rob Lee shared this on X, where I found it, going back to the source here with Pravda. But it talks about the encirclement here in Minigrad. And an important aspect when looking at this map is the gray area or contested region does not mean that there are Russian soldiers scattered all throughout here, but it also means that this is contested, right? It's very difficult to move any large numbers through here. And if you zoom in a little bit closer, there's not a clear path, right? I mean, this road to the south to Pokrovsk is essentially cut off. There's not a clear path, not a clear road to the north. So you're talking about kind of back roads and moving through fields to try to reinforce or resupply any elements here in Minigrad. And that's what some soldiers talked about in this interview in Pravda. A quote from a Marine officer said, quote, "The enclosed gray zone around Minigrad has effectively existed for several weeks. The last time we rotated personnel using vehicles was in mid-November. And then in early December, a handful of people managed to get out on foot. That's all. In November, there was another attempt through Rudinsky." Zoom out here so you can see that a little bit. Rudinsky here to the north. "But all 3 vehicles, ours and those of the neighboring unit, were destroyed. Now I understand why Pokrovsk fell so quickly, because we are facing the same situation. There comes a point where the enemy troops achieve critical mass, and that's it. They're everywhere, and it's impossible to stop that, because before they wipe out logistics and drone units and push back the artillery." So the assessment here from Pravda said, quote, "The Russians are literally everywhere. Brigades from Ukraine's air assault forces have tried to clear this corridor, but there is currently no information on the outcome of these efforts. Meanwhile, as Russian troops attempt to cut off the approach roads to Minigrad, they're also increasing their presence inside the city itself. The exact number of their forces cannot be determined, as Ukrainian troops now have increasingly limited surveillance capability." That last piece, I believe, is changed. This was written about a week ago when the fog was at its heaviest. So that did reduce Ukraine's ability to have drones overhead. That fog has since lifted in most of the front. They say soldiers told Pravda that some districts of Minograd are close to being encircled. So again, not a great situation here. I would expect that sometime in the next week or two, we hear of continued Ukrainian clearance operations around Pokrovsk and Minograd, similar in a sense to what we saw just a couple days ago in Kupiansk and what we've seen here to the north in Dobropilia. So we haven't had much from the Ukrainian side in this direction in a while now, but we know there are operations ongoing. I would expect to hear more about that before too awful long. Now, stepping back a little bit, more bigger picture, there were some pretty notable strikes between Russia and Ukraine just in the last couple days. Overnight, Russia appears to have carried out their largest drone and missile attack against Odessa since the war began. According to Russian blogger Military Informant, he said not only were hundreds of Goran and Iskander drones also launched, Iskander missiles, but also Dagger missiles used for the first time. Previously, they were mainly used for strikes on Kyiv. Yesterday, even before the start of the attack, there was damage to about 20 electrical substations in Odessa, and today about 10 more were added. It's also stated that in Odessa itself, the substations, many substations, were left without electricity. President Zelensky put out a note and some videos here talking about the strike, saying the main strike was again on our energy system in the south and Odessa region. 2 people were injured in Odessa. More than a dozen civilian objects were damaged across the country. In total, the enemy used more than 450 strike drones and 30 missiles of various types. He said it's important that everyone now sees what Russia is doing. Every step they take in terror is terror against our people. All attacks, because this is definitely not about ending the war. They still want to destroy our state and inflict as much pain as possible on our people. And it began a while ago, but the attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure to, for lack of a better term, try to freeze the Ukrainian people. So it's going to be a limit on electricity, going to be a limit on heat across Ukraine as we get into some of the nastiest winter months ahead. We're also seeing a bit of an expansion into the Black Sea, where Ukrainian drones have been targeting a number of Russian Shadow Fleet tankers. And just yesterday, Russia seems to have responded to that by striking a commercial vessel at port in Odessa. This past Wednesday, Ukrainian SBU used Sea Baby drones to attack another Russian Shadow Fleet tanker, the Dashan, under the flag of the Koromos in the Black Sea. This is the third such tanker, and we do have the footage of this one, that's been hit in the last 2 weeks. There's some reporting actually in the war zone that it might be the case that the Trump administration has signed on to this. They actually cited an Atlantic article saying that while the Biden administration feared escalation and opposed attacks on Russian vessels in international waters, Trump has taken the opposite tack. The Atlantic reported that not only did the Trump administration not object to strikes, but in a number of cases provided the transfer of intelligence to Kyiv, which was used to hit oil infrastructure facilities in Russia. Now, they're kind of conflating strikes against vessels in the Black Sea as they're kind of presenting that as the exact same as striking energy facilities and oil production facilities in Russia. There's no evidence beyond that right there that the United States is providing targeting support for going after some of these Russian Shadow Fleet tankers. Now, one of the ship that was hit yesterday by Russia, let's see, we have some footage of that here as well, looks to have gone after a Turkish vessel. Now, Rybar, in talking about this, said such strikes are attacks on our economy, like drone raids on oil depots in various parts of Russia. Unmanned surface vessels have become less effective against coastal targets, so Ukraine has switched to targets that are easy to reach. And in the absence of proper protection and counteraction, it is only a matter of time before the next vessel is damaged. And as mentioned, Russia did respond to this. The Turkish Foreign Ministry issued a statement saying, on this occasion, we once again emphasize the importance of bringing the war between Russia and Ukraine to an end as soon as possible, and we recall the need for an arrangement aimed at preventing escalation in the Black Sea, including the suspension of attacks against freedom of navigation, as well as the energy and port infrastructure of the parties. Now, the war zone went into a bit of an assessment here, talking about the risk of escalation in the Black Sea, that there's been a lot of fighting there since the opening days of the war, but generally speaking, commercial vessels have gone without being attacked for the most part. Of course, they're incredibly vulnerable there, no doubt. The war zone says Russian Shahed kamikaze drone struck a ship that was in retaliation yesterday for a recent spate of Ukrainian attacks on Russian oil tankers in the Black Sea. The attack on the Turkish-owned Sink-T roll-on, roll-off cargo ship comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin warned that he would cut Ukraine off from the sea in response to Ukraine's stepped-up campaign against Russian commercial shipping. And they go in to say that the Trump administration has reportedly signaled its support for Ukrainian attacks on Russian vessels. Again, I'm a little skeptical of that, of everything the Trump administration kind of backed away from when it comes to any involvement in the war between Russia and Ukraine. I'd be surprised if the one that we seemingly are on board with is not striking Russian airfields with Western missiles, but instead it's striking commercial vessels in the Black Sea. So I'm a little skeptical of that claim. I think more likely here is that we're seeing Ukraine use probably some of their own targeting resources, using their own munitions, and they're not paying as much attention to, especially the United States, when we say don't do this or don't attack that, because quite frankly, we're losing that leverage and have lost that leverage in a lot of ways. If we're not providing the munitions, we don't get an awful lot of say as to how said munitions are utilized. So these Sea Baby drones is a great example. Those are Ukrainian designed and manufactured. It's entirely possible they're just using those however they see best fit. But either way, it is going to be interesting to watch if this escalation in the Black Sea continues. But that's all we got for now. Again, for those interested and able, the link to contribute to our ongoing fundraiser, getting 4 trucks for 2 different Ukrainian units, is in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.